The Sahara Desert is as large as the United States, including Alaska and Hawaii. Now imagine for a moment you're in the middle when a sandstorm hits, and when it finally ends, the terrain, everything you just saw hours earlier, had been transformed into something completely new. You feel like you're on the surface of Mars. It's dry, it's hot, and now you're lost. The only way for you to survive is to drink bat blood and urine. Could you do it? Well, here's the incredible story of how marathon runner Mauro Prosperi survived 9 days in the desert doing just that. In 1994, he took part in the Marathon des Sables at 39 years old. It's a 6-day, 155-mile race through the Sahara Desert. That's the equivalent of running across the state of Indiana, but in a fucking desert. The race is so intense they require you to sign a form to say where you want your body sent in case you die. One may look at a race like this and say, how could you get lost? Look at all these people. But in 1994, there were only 80 people. So most of the time you were alone. And on the fourth day, that's when disaster struck. He was in fourth place on the fourth day of the race, which happened to be the longest, most difficult stage, when out of nowhere a violent storm began. All of a sudden, he was swallowed by a yellow wall of sand, blinded, unable to breathe. He said it felt like sand was pelting him on his face like a ton of needles in his skin. He turned his back to the storm, put a scarf over his face, and he had to keep moving. He was warned before that if he stood still during a storm, he would become buried alive. The storm lasted 8 hours, and when it finally ended, he looked upon a horrifying sight. The entire landscape had been transformed. But he had a map and a compass, so he wasn't initially worried. He figured he'd just keep jogging along and catch up to somebody that maybe got stuck in the storm also. But about 4 hours in, realizing that the compass and map weren't working without landmarks, he realized he was in trouble. So he pulled out his water bottle and began to urinate in it, thinking that he was hydrated now. This is probably the cleanest and most diluted his urine would be. Fortunately, when running the marathon, they require you to be prepared. They gave him a knife, a compass, sleeping bag, dehydrated food, and water was unfortunately only given at checkpoints, leaving him with half a bottle. At sunset on the second day, he heard the sound of a helicopter. Figuring they were looking for him, he shot his flare into the air, but they didn't see it. They flew right past him. He later learned the helicopter was returning to refuel, and his flare was only the size of a pen, so they couldn't actually notice it. After a few more days of walking, he stumbled across a Muslim shrine, and as he walked closer, hoping people would be inside, he was disappointed that it was an old burial tomb. But at least it had a roof over his head, and he could plan his next moves from inside of there. Due to the extra sand on the ground from the storm, he was able to reach the roof and decided to put a flag on top of it just in case people were looking for him. The next part is a little graphic, so if you're squeamish, close your ears. While putting the flag up there, he noticed some bats huddling together, and he decided to drink their blood. He grabbed a handful of them, cut their heads off, mushed up their insides with a knife, and sucked them out. He ate 20 of them raw. A few days later, he heard the sound of a plane. He took everything he could and lit a fire to get a smoke signal out. It didn't work. At this point, he realized he was going to die. Instead of dying an agonizing death, he decided to slit his wrists. So he wrote a note in charcoal to his wife, cut his wrist, and laid down next to the coffin to die. To his surprise, he woke up the following morning. He had failed at killing himself. His blood had thickened so much it wouldn't drain. This gave him a burst of energy, realizing that death didn't want him yet. He wasn't supposed to die, not here, not now. He decided he needed to keep walking. Remembering the advice they had been given before the race started, if you're lost, head for the clouds you can see on the horizon at dawn. That's where you'll find life. During the day they disappear, but set your compass and carry that direction. That's what he did. He walked that direction for days, killing snakes and lizards and eating them raw. At this point, he became so dehydrated he couldn't even urinate. But on the 8th day, he miraculously stumbled across an oasis in the desert. He lay there for 6 or 7 hours, slowly sipping on the water. And then he noticed a footprint. This gave him hope that people couldn't be far away. The next day, he got up and began walking. The next day, he started walking, and that's when he noticed some goats and a young shepherd girl, but she ran away in fear. He followed her footprints back to a Berber tent where they called the police to help him, but the police didn't know who he was and thought he could be a danger to them. The police finally came and carried him to his jeep. They blindfolded him because they didn't know if he was dangerous or not, but after they discovered he was the marathon runner that had gotten lost in Morocco, they took off the blindfold and celebrated. He had then discovered that he had crossed over the border into Algeria and was 181 miles off course. When he arrived at the hospital, he had lost 35 pounds, coming in at a total of 99 pounds. His eyes and liver were damaged, but his kidneys were fine. He could only eat soup or liquids for months, and it took him 2 years to recover. But incredibly, after 4 years in this ordeal, he went back and re-ran the Marathon des Sables, stating when he starts something, he wants to finish it. And he has since run 8 desert marathons.